One afternoon, he ventured to the Red Keep's library to research older testimonies and documents about Robert's rebellion, hoping to uncover official accounts that might shed more light on the Lannisters' involvement. The shelves were dusty, the tomes yellowed with age. Sorting through them proved a tedious task, made all the more frustrating by the realization that certain records seemed suspiciously absent. He found volumes detailing the final battles, the sacking of King's Landing, and coronation ceremonies, but glaring gaps existed where references to Oberyn Martell might have been expected. He sensed a deliberate hand had redacted parts of history. If he needed more proof that Tywin Lannister had orchestrated a cover-up, this was it. Later that day, as he stood on a balcony overlooking Blackwater Bay, he spotted Tyrion approaching with a thoughtful expression. The dwarf lord joined him at the balustrade. They spoke quietly, their voices carrying on the warm wind. Tyrion thanked him again, not for the first time, for saving his life. Oberyn accepted the thanks gracefully. Then Tyrion cleared his throat. "I've heard rumors. Cersei is talking about retribution. She'll never speak it plainly, but she blames you for father's humiliation and for the blow to our house's reputation. Be careful, Prince Oberyn. The Lannisters do not forgive easily." Oberyn nodded, gazing out at the horizon. "I have spent my life among vipers, Lord Tyrion. My own family crest bears a spear in the sun. Dorne is no stranger to subtle warfare. The Lannisters had better be careful as well." He paused, considering how far to trust the imp. "I do not wish to provoke an open war, but if the crown cannot let this matter rest, then neither will I." Even with the storm clouds gathering overhead, daily life in the capital continued. Oberyn made a point of appearing at court sessions, listening quietly as petitions were heard and judgments passed. It intrigued him to see how the boy king, Tommen, was guided by Tywin and Cersei. The hand of the real power behind the throne was apparent at every turn, though Tommen himself seemed good-hearted enough, if naive. Oberyn also noted Margaery's gentle influence on the Child King and suspected the Tyrells would eventually push for more power. The entire stage was set for a complicated dance, and Oberyn was determined not to be caught unawares when the music changed. He began to forge alliances discreetly. He spoke with Bronn, the Sellsword-turned knight who had once served Tyrion. He took measure of various lesser lords who had reasons to resent House Lannister's iron grip on the throne. He met with pyromancers to see if they harbored any ill will after the devastation of wildfire. Each conversation was a small thread in a tapestry that Oberyn wove behind the scenes, a mixture of quiet influence and information gathering. Should Tywin Lannister move against him, Oberyn wanted to be ready. Word of Gregor's death spread beyond King's Landing, down the Rose Road and across the continent. In the Riverlands, the small folk rejoiced to learn that the monstrous knight who had burned their villages and terrorized them was gone. In the north, rumors mingled with other concerns, but some lords found satisfaction in hearing that a beast had been slain. In the Reach, the Tyrell bannermen noted it as another sign of Lannister weakness, though they expressed it with caution. In Dorne, however, the news was celebrated with private feasts and the pealing of bells in Sunspear. Oberyn Martell wrote Oberyn again, congratulating him, urging him to tread carefully in King's Landing, but also hinting that Dorne's armies were not so far away should the day come when the Iron Throne pressed too hard. One evening, while passing through the torchlit corridors of the Red Keep, Oberyn encountered Jaime Lannister. The Kingslayer regarded him with a level expression that gave away little. "My brother owes you his life," Jaime said. "I do not like to be in anyone's debt, nor do I like that my father has been dealt such a blow. But you fought well." There was a grudging respect in Jaime's tone. Oberyn smiled slightly, recognizing the complicated dynamic at play. "My lord, your brother was innocent. I believed so and stood for him. As for your father, he is a man who plays the Game of Thrones better than most. But no man is untouchable." Jaime nodded, tapping a gold-fitted finger on his sword belt. "I would ask you not to stoke the embers too much. War has been brutal for everyone, and a new conflict is the last thing King's Landing needs. However, if you must cross swords with the Lion again, do not expect it to be so straightforward." It was both a warning and an acknowledgement, and Oberyn accepted it as such. He watched Jaime limp away, seeming heavier in spirit than when Oberyn had first arrived in the capital. Despite these undercurrents of tension, no immediate clash erupted. The city devoured drama by the hour, and soon enough, fresh rumors occupied the tongues of courtiers and commoners alike. The threat of Ironborn raids, the question of whether Peter Baelish would return to court, the ongoing struggles of the Night's Watch. The realm was vast, and many crises competed for attention. All the while, Oberyn quietly advanced his own agenda, consolidating the small pieces of evidence that tied Gregor's actions to Tywin's commands. He was methodical, seeking testimonies from men who had served under Gregor or from those who had witnessed the events at the sack of King's Landing years ago. A handful of these men had died in battle, some from disease, and others conveniently vanished. But the more he dug, the more he realized how thorough Tywin had been in burying any proof. It made the confession on the day of the trial even more invaluable. That one admission, overheard by hundreds, was the keystone of Oberyn's entire mission. Late one night, in the candlelit gloom of his borrowed chambers, Oberyn penned a personal letter to his brother Doran. He detailed his attempts to gather more evidence, lamenting how few witnesses remained. He told his brother that while the direct crime had been avenged, the question of who gave the order still festered like a wound. Oberyn speculated on the need for caution, that if they pressed too hard, the Lannisters might resort to open confrontation. Or worse, they might attempt to assassinate Oberyn in the dead of night, claiming it was the act of brigands or some fanatic who blamed him for killing the mountain. Indeed, Oberyn had taken extra precautions. He traveled with a retinue of loyal Dornishmen at all times, and his personal guard never let him out of sight without due cause. Eventually, a subtle shift occurred in the court's atmosphere. Tywin, with his typical political savvy, seemed to realize that ignoring Oberyn's presence and the confession was only intensifying the hush of rumors. He began to include the Red Viper in more official matters, summoning him to council meetings, feigning a desire for Dorne's perspective on certain trade and diplomatic issues. It was an attempt, Oberyn recognized, to co-opt him. If Oberyn was folded into the machinery of governance, perhaps he would have less reason to raise old ghosts. Oberyn played along, for the moment, mindful that a high position in King's Landing might afford him better chances to push for truths that the Lannisters wanted hidden. During one such council meeting, Oberyn found himself seated near Mace Tyrell and Pycelle, discussing shipments of grain. At first, he simply listened, but when the talk shifted to the subject of distributing royal funds to help rebuild areas damaged by the war, Oberyn seized the moment to point out how Gregor Clegane's men had been a blight upon the Riverlands. His remarks were pointed, a not-so-subtle reminder of the monstrous cruelty inflicted by the man who had confessed to raping and murdering Oberyn Martell. Tywin's nostrils flared. Lord Varys and Littlefinger, both in attendance, exchanged cautious looks. Mace Tyrell cleared his throat uncomfortably. The tension in the room was palpable. Still, Tywin said nothing to rebuke Oberyn. If anything, the Lord of Casterly Rock was measuring him, observing how deftly Oberyn could play the game. The conversation continued, but the strain was evident, like a coiled spring waiting to snap. After that meeting, Oberyn heard that Cersei had raged in private, complaining to anyone who would listen that Oberyn was goading them, that the entire trial by combat had been a ploy to humiliate House Lannister. Some said she had consulted Qyburn about potions or other devices to exact vengeance on the Dornish prince. Oberyn took such rumors seriously. He stationed additional guards near his quarters and made sure Illyria was well protected. He knew better than to underestimate Cersei's hatred. In the weeks that followed, Oberyn's position in King's Landing resembled that of a viper coiled among the stones of a courtyard. He was both a danger to be avoided and a fascination to onlookers. Ladies of the court would whisper as he passed, enthralled by the tall, handsome Dornish prince who had toppled a brute the size of a small mountain. Young knights, eager for renown, gawked at him in the training yard, though none dared challenge him outright. Meanwhile, the everyday toils of governance continued, with Tywin Lannister asserting the lion's share of authority. The friction between them was an undercurrent, a quiet, ever-present hum. On a crisp morning, while strolling through the royal gardens, Oberyn encountered Prince Oberyn Martell, his own nephew, who had arrived from Dorne with a small escort. Overjoyed to see a familiar face from home, Oberyn embraced the boy warmly. Trystane was older than when last he'd been in King's Landing, with a soft mustache and a regal bearing. The prince explained that Doran had sent him to observe, to understand the court. Oberyn knew there was another reason as well, to show the crown that Dorne's future came with a face, and that any aggression against House Martell would have ramifications. Trystane's presence was a message. Over dinner that night, Oberyn regaled Trystane with the story of the trial by combat. The boy listened with wide eyes, equal parts awe and discomfort at the brutal details. "So you truly slew the mountain?" Trystane asked in hushed wonder. "I heard so many tales, and some still say it was a trick of the gods or that you used dark magics." Oberyn chuckled, though a slight pall lingered in his voice. There was no trick, no magic. A spear, skill, and the gods' favor for one fleeting moment. That was enough. He did not add that part of him would have gladly welcomed black magic if it guaranteed the mountain's downfall. Some thirsts cannot be quenched with reason alone. With Trystane's arrival, the court was reminded of Dorne's significance. Oberyn used the opportunity to open diplomatic channels, exchanging polite courtesies with the Tyrells, carefully measured words with the Lannisters, and subtle jabs with Cersei. Over a period of weeks, he laid the groundwork for a potential alliance that, should Tywin push too hard, might result in Dorne standing with the Tyrells or even seeking out other disgruntled lords. He did not want war, but he would not shy away from letting the threat of it linger. The memory of Elaya's fate demanded that Dorne never again appear weak in the face of Lannister might. Strangely, as time wore on, Oberyn found a certain pleasure in being alive in King's Landing despite its rot. The city's swirling intrigues, the possibilities of forging alliances, even the lavish feasts and exotic visitors. It felt, in its own twisted way, like a realm of infinite potential. He found unexpected camaraderie with a handful of knights who admired his skill, and one evening, he even shared an offhand jest with Jaime Lannister about the absurdities of court life. The tension never vanished, but it settled into a manageable hum, overshadowed by the daily demands of governance. Through it all, Oberyn never lost sight of his goal: to ensure that the truth about Elaya's fate remained unburied. With each passing day, more men and women in the city seemed to accept that Gregor had indeed confessed. Though some tried to shrug it off as a delirium, others believed the words. It was said that the story would eventually spill beyond King's Landing, that bards and singers would pen ballads about the Red Viper who slew the mountain. And in those verses, Elaya's name would be remembered. That was its own sort of justice. Or so Oberyn told himself on nights when self-doubt gnawed at him. Eventually, word came that a raven from Sunspear had arrived for Oberyn. The day was mild, bright sunlight filling the throne room's windows. Oberyn read his brother's letter in private. Doran praised Oberyn's success in maintaining his position, hinting that Dorne was ready to demand some form of reparation. The letter closed with a single line: "Whatever path you choose, remember you do not walk it alone. Dorne stands behind you." The weight of those words settled over Oberyn as he folded the parchment. Perhaps a day would come when he challenged Tywin more openly, demanded that the crown acknowledge House Martell's rightful grievances. But for now, he would continue to walk the line between open hostility and strategic advancement. Killing the mountain had changed the board considerably. Tyrion's life had been spared, and the Lannisters had suffered a humiliating blow, but their power was not broken. War might still loom if he misstepped. And yet, in the quiet chambers of his mind, Oberyn felt a strange sense of possibility blooming alongside the sorrow. Elia was avenged. Her murderer had confessed. The world knew, and no one could strip that truth away. A chapter of his life had closed, but a dozen more had opened in its wake. And so Oberyn Martell stayed in King's Landing, weaving the delicate threads of politics, forging relationships, reminding the realm, whenever he could, that Dorne neither forgave nor forgot easily. He remained watchful, knowing that the Lannisters could strike from the shadows. Yet he also knew that with each passing day, his legacy grew. The Red Viper who slew the mountain in single combat, the prince who forced a monster to confess. Perhaps in time, the realm would remember Oberyn Martell's name with the respect and pity it deserved. Maybe, if the gods were just, the tale of her murder would not be overshadowed by the shuffle of power and the songs of other heroes. He would fight for that. He would fight for Dorne's honor. He would fight for the ghosts that haunted him. But he would also fight for the living, his daughters, Illyria, his brother, his nephew. In King's Landing, a city built on duplicity and ambition, he could still carve a path that fused justice and purpose. The warm Dornish sun did not shine here, but Oberyn Martell carried it within him, in the fire of his heart. Perhaps that was the true reason he had survived the mountain's onslaught, so that the light of day might finally shine on old crimes. And so the seasons turned in King's Landing. Spies whispered in the alleyways, lords quarreled in the corridors of power, and the small council debated their next moves. Through it all, Oberyn Martell stood as a living testament that sometimes, just sometimes, vengeance could be won in a single day beneath a scorching sun. The shadow of the mountain no longer loomed over him. When Oberyn closed his eyes each night, he still saw Alya's face, but he also saw the confessional moment, that final breath when the mountain rasped her name, giving the realm the undeniable truth. And though the road ahead was uncertain and paved with potential peril, Oberyn felt a quiet resolve. He had triumphed where others thought he would surely fail. The Red Viper had proven that the spirit of Dorne could not be crushed, that a man fueled by rage and love for his kin might shatter even the strongest sword. In the late hours, sometimes Oberyn would stroll through the gardens of the Red Keep, the glow of lanterns flickering among the hedges. He would remember the Colosseum, the roar of the crowd, the clang of steel, and that final thrust of his spear that brought the mountain down. He recalled the hush that fell when the giant finally confessed, his life seeping away into the dust. In that hush, he had felt his own heart pounding like a war drum, a testament to the unstoppable force of his determination. In that hush, he had taken back his sister's stolen honor. And in that hush, he had carved for himself a new story, one that would echo through the Seven Kingdoms long after men forgot the details of who sat on what throne. Life in King's Landing continued, but Oberyn's presence had forever altered its complexion. Tyrion Lannister walked free, the Lannisters guarded their pride more fiercely, and the realm whispered the name Martell with renewed respect and fear. Some said a new age might be dawning, shaped by alliances that had yet to be forged. Others believed the realm would be plunged once more into chaos if the embers of old hatred were stirred too vigorously. Oberyn Martell, in the midst of it all, wore a small, knowing smile. Victory had come at last for Elia, and for himself. If the realm was a pit of snakes, then he would remain the Red Viper, venomous and coiled, ready to strike if threatened. And so, with the echo of vengeance still reverberating in the wind, he found within himself a sense of purpose that went beyond that single day's fight. For Oberyn Martell, having bested the mountain, had proved that even the mightiest pillars of power could be toppled, and that, more than anything, was what gave him hope in a land forever caught between the bitterness of the past and the uncertainty of the future.